Voice dysphoria sucks, right?
Is that a serious question?
Well, it turns out, dear trans viewer, that science agrees with us that it's not just a bad feeling. Voice dysphoria can have a measurable, quantifiable impact on your quality of life and ability to use your voice. And we're going to go over some new data on exactly how bad
It sucks.
It sucks.
It sucks.
It sucks.
Hi, I'm Renee, and I'm a gender-affirming voice teacher. Today, I want to talk to you about the measurable impact of voice dysphoria. Now, you know me, I love a little journal prompt, I love a little woo, I love getting tender and into our feelings on our gender-affirming voice journeys.
Feelings? What feelings?
But when there's new, cutting-edge, hard science out there that represents something crucial in the fight to protect access to gender-affirming care, I simply can't sit idly by. T will, however, provide memes for comfort.
Hope has arrived, because I am here.
So today, I want to tell you about the findings of a new study published in the Laryngoscope called Impaired Voice-Related Work Productivity, a Functional Effect of Gender Dysphoria.
Is that a title?
It is.
Now, before your eyes glaze over at that title, please stay with me, because what this study does is provide quantifiable evidence that vocal gender dysphoria creates measurable, significant functional impairment in people's lives, specifically in their ability to work and be productive in their jobs. And I'm not the only one excited about this research. I got to talk to one of the co-authors of this study, Jay Bernardo, who's a speech pathologist at the University of Washington, specializing in gender-affirming voice care. And yes, they're also one of us.
One of us! One of us!
Here's Jay introducing himself. I am so excited to talk to you about this research, but first, can you tell the audience who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. My name is Jay Bernardo. I use primarily they, them, but also she, her pronouns. I am a speech pathologist at the University of Washington in Seattle, Washington. And I specialize in voice and voice disorders and voice, upper airway swallowing, but have a particular emphasis in gender-affirming care.
Now, I want to be really clear about something up front. This video is not about pathologizing trans people. Lord knows we get more than enough of that already. This is about understanding how we build the evidence base that protects access to care. Because right now, gender-affirming voice treatments like voice therapy, voice lessons, and surgical interventions are under threat. I know as trans people, you don't need to be told that. But hey, cis person who's watching, pay attention. Insurance companies have historically classified these treatments as cosmetic, which means that they don't have to cover them. And in this current political climate, we're seeing aggressive moves to strip coverage for all gender-affirming care.
I hate it here!
So every study like this, it's a brick in the fortress we're building to protect access to care. And I asked Jay what motivated this particular research.
Our primary motivation for this research was to help grow and improve the body of evidence for gender-affirming voice care. Our hope is that this may help improve insurance coverage and access to this type of care, including both like surgical intervention as well as more like behavioral voice training.
Exactly, so let's talk about what this research actually shows.
Wake the up, samurai.
We have studies to learn.
The research and what it measures. All right, so let's get into the research and what it measures. This study used something called Workhoarse, H-O-A-R-S-E. And yes, that's a pun on Workhorse, H-O-R-S-E, which is a validated measurement tool that specifically assesses voice-related productivity impairment at work. The scale runs from 0, meaning no impairment at all, to 32, which represents maximum impairment.
32!
Workhoarse was originally developed because researchers found that standard workplace productivity measures weren't capturing the specific ways that voice disorders affect people's ability to do their jobs. It was validated using people with traditionally recognized voice disorders, things like spasmodic dysphonia, which is a neurological condition that causes involuntary spasms of the vocal folds, vocal fold lesions like nodules or polyps, and vocal tremor. These are conditions that insurance companies already recognize as medical problems that deserve treatment. Because you know that if an insurance company has to pay for it, they are going to make sure they actually get data on it. We take what we can get.
Capitalism.
Now, you might be wondering, why did this research focus specifically on work productivity when there are so many other ways voice dysphoria impacts our lives? Here's what Jay told me.
Work productivity was the first study published from this data that we gathered using these surveys. And the research team chose to focus on work productivity first because we felt like this could be the most high impact. For better or worse, like labor and money are, often some of the things that are most motivating for the financial stakeholders in healthcare, such as like insurance companies, right?
Right. But before you think this is the only data they're collecting, Jay had some good news.
So in addition to work productivity, we also ask questions about other topics, such as like mental health and kind of other aspects of quality of life. But our hope is that we can use some of the other data we also gathered at the same time to publish like additional studies related to other topics as well. So stay tuned for that.
More papers to come. Okay, so here's what the 2025 study found. Researchers at the University of Washington and San Francisco Voice and Swallowing recruited 50 cisgender people and 50 transgender people, all actively employed, none with pre-existing vocal pathology like nodules or paralysis. The transgender group included 64% trans women, 10% trans men, and 26% non-binary or other gender non-conforming folks. The average Workhoarse score for the cisgender group was 2.1. For the transgender group, 14.2. That's a difference of over 12 points, and that is massive. When they broke it down further, trans women averaged 16.1, trans men averaged 19.8, and non-binary individuals averaged 7.5. To put those numbers into context, previous research using Workhoarse found that people with spasmodic dysphonia, that neurological voice disorder that I mentioned, had an average score of 16. People who had various types of dysphonia from a mix of causes, neurological conditions, functional conditions, benign vocal fold lesions, averaged 17.8. So the work impairment experienced by trans women and trans men due to vocal gender dysphoria is statistically comparable to the work impairment experienced by people with recognized neurological and structural voice disorders. Even when they accounted for age and how much people needed to use their voice at work, the trans subjects had Workhoarse scores 12.4 units higher than the cis subjects. This wasn't about having a more voice-intensive job. This was about voice dysphoria creating functional impairment. The study also measured something called VHI-10, Voice Handicap Index, which assesses overall voice-related disability and quality of life. The trans group averaged 16.2 compared to 2.7 for the cis group. Trans women specifically averaged 17.8, which is consistent with other studies that have found VHI-10 scores for trans women ranging from 15.8 to 19.8. Now here's where it gets interesting from a medical classification standpoint, and I'm going to quote directly from the paper because this is important. Notably, it may be argued that reduced quality of life alone does not meet the definition of functional impairment. On the other hand, reduced ability to communicate, particularly with relation to employment as measured by Workhoarse, is more clearly reflective of functional impairment. So what does functional impairment actually mean? I asked Jay about this, especially given how uncomfortable it can be to use medical terminology around trans experiences.
The literal definition of like functional impairment would be, in my mind, something that disrupts someone's ability to complete activities of daily living.
Right.
So to me, the term functional kind of suggests that, it may not be something structural, such as like due to like a disease process or anatomic difference, but maybe more like cognitive or like emotionally based.
And here's how Jay thinks about it as a therapist.
As a therapist, I feel like my lens is typically very life participation focused. So for myself as a healthcare professional that works with voice and communication, I'm often really thinking about communication participation. Are my patients able to participate in communication for social activities, work, relationships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I see my role as to help patients participate in communication without barriers in order to improve their quality of life.
And look, I know how deeply uncomfortable it is to center work productivity as the measure of whether something deserves treatment. It feels gross, right? Like our only value as humans is our economic output under
Capitalism.
But unfortunately, that's the game we have to play with insurance companies. They don't care that you can't sing in the shower anymore. They care that you can't answer phones at work. Welcome to our current hell world where your worth is measured in productivity metrics.
Yay.
But in the paper, Jay and the other researchers actually make a broader point here. Employment is, of course, important for functioning in society, and inadequate employment is linked with worsened health outcomes and higher mortality rates. So while yes, we're playing capitalism's game, employment genuinely does affect survival. Access to healthcare, housing stability, financial security, these things are literally life or death, especially for trans people who already face systemic barriers. There's also a 2023 study in the International Journal of Transgender Health that I'll mention briefly because it provides useful context. That study used different measurement tools and found that people perceived transfeminine vocal gender dysphoria as having an impact comparable to monocular blindness. It's another data point showing that this is not a minor concern. This is not cosmetic. This is measurable, significant functional impairment. Why this study matters for insurance coverage. Okay, so we have this data showing measurable impairment. Now let's talk about why that matters for getting insurance companies to cover gender-affirming voice care. Insurance companies generally classify treatments as either cosmetic or reconstructive/medically necessary. Cosmetic procedures are things you choose to undergo to improve your appearance, but that don't affect your health or function. Reconstructive or medically necessary procedures are things that address actual impairment or disease. I trust you can see where we are going with this. For something to be considered reconstructive and medically necessary, it generally needs to meet criteria like it causes deviation from the normal function of a tissue or organ. It results in difficulties performing basic life functions. Treatment is likely to improve physiological function. Historically, gender-affirming voice care has been classified as cosmetic. The argument insurance companies have made is there's no anatomic pathology, there's no neurological dysfunction. The vocal folds look normal on examination. Therefore, this is about wanting to sound different, not about treating a medical condition.
Me? Upset? Nah.
And the study directly addresses this in the introduction. It notes that treatment for vocal gender dysphoria has historically been considered cosmetic due, in part, to the lack of anatomic or neurologic vocal pathology. But it argues that treatment of other anatomically typical conditions is considered reconstructive when there is an associated functional impairment. This study challenges the cosmetic categorization by proving functional impairment. It's showing that vocal gender dysphoria does interfere with basic life functions, specifically the ability to work and be productive in employment. And that's one of the key criteria for reconstructive care.
Capitalism.
But for good.
Now, I know this whole conversation about pathologization versus medical necessity can feel really uncomfortable. We're trying to move away from pathologizing trans people. We don't want to be listed in the DSM as a mental health disorder. We don't want our existence medicalized. But we also need insurance coverage and access to care.
Well, you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
So how do we balance these things? I asked Jay about this tension.
Similar to, the conversation we were just having about like dysphoria and billing codes and insurance coverage, etc. I think we always have to kind of walk this tricky balance between we know that gender dysphoria or just gender voice misalignment or incongruence is not like a pathology. It's not a disorder. We want to work to depathologize those things. And as a medical professional, right, I work in a system that really does kind of pathologize those things, unfortunately. And so I think there are things that, I try to do personally, but sometimes we gotta play by the rules when it comes to some of these research stuff.
Sometimes we gotta play by the rules, and part of that is putting these things into frameworks that people with power already have set up. That's the reality we're working with. The study gives a useful comparison: septoplasty. A deviated septum is often just a variation of normal anatomy, not a disease, not an injury. But when a deviated septum causes nasal obstruction that interferes with breathing, septoplasty is covered as reconstructive and medically necessary. The same anatomic variation without the functional impairment, that might be considered cosmetic.
I'm just saying it's arbitrary.
The study is establishing that vocal gender dysphoria with functional impairment should be viewed the same way. The baseline anatomy might be typical, but the functional impairment is real and measurable and comparable to recognized medical conditions. The conclusion states this explicitly. This study identifies a functional impairment associated with vocal gender dysphoria, which fulfills one of multiple criteria used to define medically necessary and reconstructive interventions. One of multiple criteria. This isn't the only argument that needs to be made, but it's an important piece.
And the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So Jim is actually my friend.
And this matters because we're in a moment where access to all gender-affirming care is under attack. U.S. state legislatures are passing laws restricting, if not outright banning, care. Insurance coverage is being challenged and rolled back. Medical boards are being pressured to limit what providers can offer, and that's to say nothing of things happening in other parts of the world. Every piece of evidence that demonstrates medical necessity is armor against those attacks. This research gives patients and providers language they can use in insurance appeals. It gives policymakers data they can cite when defending coverage requirements. It gives medical societies evidence they can point to when establishing standards of care. Here's what Jay hopes this study will accomplish.
Like you and I and probably many of your viewers know that gender-affirming care, including for voice, is not just cosmetic, right? Gender-affirming care is, it's about more than just like being more beautiful or more handsome or whatever, but about helping people be who they are and move through the world more safely and more securely. And I think most medical professionals who work with trans people also do know this. That's been my experience. But like I said, the financial stakeholders often kind of need to be convinced. And so my hope is that this study helps provide some objective data that helps prove why this care is necessary for many people and should, for example, be covered by insurance.
Yeah, totally. Now, you might be wondering about treatment outcomes. This study wasn't designed to track people longitudinally through treatment, but the researchers do reference the broader literature showing that voice therapy and surgical interventions improve voice-related quality of life and patient satisfaction. The evidence supports that these interventions work.
Intervention.
Think about what a reduction in work impairment actually means in someone's life. It might mean being able to take customer service calls without panic. It might mean feeling confident enough to present at team meetings. It might mean being able to apply for promotions that require public speaking or phone work. It might mean not having to choose between being misgendered constantly or avoiding voice-dependent tasks that could advance your career. It might mean the difference between having to be visible or choosing to be visible. So here's what I want you to take away from this. We are not trying to prove that trans people are broken or pathological. We're documenting that the combination of gender dysphoria and societal response to it creates measurable harm. That harm is equivalent in severity to recognized medical conditions, and research shows treatment addresses that harm. Every study like this is a brick in the fortress we're building to protect access to care, and we need that fortress because the attacks on trans healthcare are real and ongoing. While this fortress isn't the entire solution to the problems that the community is currently facing, the fact that we are still seeing more research confirming our experiences is promising. We need to keep seeing our experiences documented and preserved, even if the framing is productivity, instead of having those experiences getting swept under the rug. If you're a trans person dealing with vocal gender dysphoria, this research is a tool you can use. You can cite this study when you're appealing an insurance denial. You can share it with your healthcare provider when they're writing a letter of medical necessity. This is evidence that what you're experiencing is real and measurable and deserving of treatment. The study even notes that many major insurance companies in the US already provide coverage for gender-affirming voice care, and international standards of care support voice surgery as medically necessary. But the researchers say, however, it may be prudent to assess gender-affirming interventions with the same criteria as other medical interventions to ensure that there is a strong body of evidence to guide or prevent potential changes to care in the future. In other words, we need to keep building the evidence base. We can't assume protections will stay in place.
This was not the life I imagined for us.
But it's a life worth fighting for.
And remember what Jay said earlier. She said this team is working on additional papers, examining other aspects of quality of life beyond just work productivity. The evidence base is growing. More bricks for the fortress. If you're looking for resources on addressing voice dysphoria, you are actually in the right place. I have a ton of free resources here on my channel, my freebies library on my website, which contains free classes, books, progress trackers, and other tools, and my self-directed online trans voice courses. I've linked everything below, as well as links to the studies mentioned today. This research matters. Use it, share it, cite it, because every brick we add to this fortress makes it harder to tear down access to care. That's all for today. I've been Renee, and I hope this helps.
It's just been a while since we've been referencing papers.
I know.
It feels like the early videos.
I know.
Kind of fun.
We were like really worried about not being scientific enough in those videos.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad you convinced me to just do one location. Anyway, we're good.
You know yourself. That's it.
That's it.
That's a wrap. Yay!